Next up on the agenda is our IPv6 panel. I don't know if we have slides. I don't have slides. No? Nope. 3. Okay. So the panel is going to be discussing issues in IPv6. ARIN Hughes is the moderator. We have panelists Hector Rios, John Jason Brzozowski, Zaid Alec, Zaid Alec, and Alec Peterson. And at this point, I'll turn it over to you, ARIN.
Thank you, John. And thank you very much, panelists, for participating in this v6 discussion. First, just want to open with one basic rule of engagement. Whether you come up to ask questions or comments or you're a panelist commenting, I would ask that you keep company names out of comments, whether you're giving praise or you're saying, for example, you had to wait on it. Please don't use Bob's Bait and Tackle, ISP, or CDN. Just say a CDN provider or a hardware vendor. Appreciate that. So first, we'll just kick it off with a very brief introduction. Why don't we just start with you, John?
Great. Yep. Can somebody cue my slides up back there, if you don't mind? So these might actually automate themselves if all things go well here. If not, then I have a trusty clicker. So kind of leading up to this panel, kind of looked at the agenda here, try to figure out what exactly you could possibly want to hear from me from an IPv6 point of view. So I thought I would sprinkle in a little bit about, kind of where we've been, but more importantly, kind of what the current state of the state is, and hopefully that'll fuel some discussion that we have here with ARIN and the rest of the panelists. Many years ago, I've been to a few of these meetings. We've talked about kind of the roots of some of our v6 deployment. Anybody who's a kind of a cable broadband customer, whether you're in the United States or abroad, a cable modem is pretty important component to how you utilize a DOCSIS network. So one of the things that we usually lead off here with is kind of giving you some insight into where we started and where that is.
So sorry, but just in case, say you're with Comcast, that hasn't been mentioned yet.
Okay, I'm with Comcast, in case you didn't know. Today, we have about 40 million cable modems on our network. 39.5 million of them are v6 only. That's a lot. Yeah. And if the modem doesn't work, guess what else doesn't work? Nothing works. So we did that. I can't really see the scale anymore, but we're probably going on 4-5 years now. And now we're really just trying to get rid of the rest of the modems in the sense that either upgrade them, wait for them to kind of cycle out lifetime-wise. So for anybody in the net, in the audience that is wondering, like, does it really work? It works. You should try it. Next slide. Or is it on me? I got it. So on the heels of that, a few years later, maybe a little overlapping, we also turned on dual stack broadband. So we added v6. We turned it on. This is kind of old news. We talked about this quite a bit in some other fora, probably a year or so ago at an analog. It looks, it's an important chart for people who don't really kind of have a lot of experience with this, but basically 90% of our customers today are dual stack enabled. That means they're actively provisioned with v6, actively using it. I think at this stage of the game, we are either approaching or just about to kind of surpass 50% of our traffic is v6 today. And I can, if the question arises, I can talk about what that drop is there during the panel. I'll leave you wanting that, though, until later. Next slide, if it's in my control or not. Okay. Last but not least, probably the most interesting thing, and I'm hoping that we can also generate some discussion around this. So probably should have mentioned this in the intro, but we for those of you who don't know, Comcast provides voice, video, data, and a number of other services, right? This particular graph is basically oriented towards our X1 platform. So if anybody here happens to be a Comcast customer, use X1. Hopefully you're happy. If not, let me know. We'll see what we can do about that. But that platform has been a pretty successful platform. I for one can tell you that it's a huge upgrade compared to the legacy video technology that John Sweeting is currently laughing about, and I'm laughing on the inside. But it's a huge upgrade, and this platform has been quite popular for us. So popular that it outgrew v4, and we knew it would. So what you'll notice here is that is a pretty aggressive line up and to the right, the blue and the red. That is basically us migrating almost all of them, all the X1s to V6 only, no V4 support, in the period of less than 3 months. Tens of millions of them. With that, that's my last slide. I'll hand it off to whomever ARIN tells me to hand it off to.
Sure. Thanks, John. I appreciate the introduction. Hector Rios is from Louisiana State University. Could you possibly give a brief introduction as well?
Yeah, Hector Rios, Louisiana State University, main campus in Baton Rouge. I'm a network engineer in the Department of Information Technology Services. I've been part of LSU for the past 15 years in different capacities, but mostly as a network engineer with a team of really talented people. We've been supporting IPv6 since 2008, and should I go into the details or? Just a brief introduction. Yeah, so I can talk about the details once we're finished with the introductions.
Thanks, Hector. Zaid Kahn from LinkedIn.
Thanks. My name is Zaid. I just on a brief note, I didn't prepare any slides because there's tons of information out on the net that you can download, and we've given a lot of talks on this. So we launched V6 from LinkedIn perspective, I think in 2014. It was September, October, somewhere around there. We brought all our sites to V6. We started off, I think, the day of the launch at like 3%, and now we are somewhere between 10 and 12% of global traffic. So we, since then, we've managed to see a lot of growth in also different parts of it. I'm happy to say that our mobile side has seen a lot of growth. We've had a very major mobile provider that's now serving just 80% of traffic over V6, which is a huge growth for us, seeing from the mobile side. And more than half of our traffic is actually mobile, so that's actually great to see. We're seeing a lot of growth in different parts of the world over time, and there's also some stats out there on that. The other sort of, it's just from a high level, our next sort of venture into V6 is inside the data center. So we are targeting towards V6 only data center and V6 only deployments, and I can go into detail when we actually talk about that. So I'd be happy to share that when we talk about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Zaid. Alec Peterson is with Amazon CloudFront.
Hi, I'm Alec Peterson. As ARIN said, I'm with Amazon Web Services, and we've been working on V6 in the background for a while. But we started announcing our support for V6 in 2016, starting with S3 support in the middle of the year, following with Route 53, WAF, S3 transfer acceleration, and CloudFront in October. And then we announced support for what most of our customers were waiting for, which was EC2, VPC, ALB, and ELB as well. Since then, we've also added support for Direct Connect and IoT. And as a large number of the Amazon services, the AWS services are built on top of those building blocks, they now have the structure to be able to build on those. So we're thrilled to now being able to give our customers this IPv6 support, such as, in fact, helping enable the Comcast video platform as well. So we're really excited about that, and happy to answer whatever questions we can on that. ARIN?
Thanks, Alec. It seems most of you answered where you were in your progress for deploying V6. I think, Hector, maybe we'll come back to you. Where are you in your progress with deploying V6?
So as I mentioned, we started with V6 in 2008, and it started actually as a request that came from Internet 2 when they had a meeting here in New Orleans. Actually, LSU was the host, and we provided different networking requirements, and IPv6 wasn't a requirement, but they wanted to have it at the conference. And once we started looking into the protocol, we became a little bit more interested about it. So we decided to implement it on campus at a small scale, basically within our building in ITS, just so that we could get our hands dirty. And that led into more investigation. we wanted to participate in the effort to support IPv6, so we had to do a full inventory of our network infrastructure, and we started to find out where we were lacking support or features, and that process took about 2 years, and eventually we deployed it campus-wide in a dual stack fashion. We participated in IPv6 World A and eventually IPv6 launch. We work with the community to make them aware that we were configured for a dual stack, and as we started operating in that manner, we just continued to learn more and more about the subtleties of IPv6. So.
Thanks, Hector. How about we go to Zaid? What drove your decisions to be an adopter of v6?
So I think that, I mean, the obvious one was we, in the planet, we're going to run out of v4 at some stage, right? So that was something we want to stay ahead of. Business continuity, I guess, would be a good way to put it. Like, if we are out there serving, at the moment, more than 400 million users out there, as we're going to grow, I mean, we have to eventually sort of address this problem. So we want to get a head start of it. The other one is increase in mobile growth was also a big factor. We realized very quickly that emerging markets, globally had no other option but to adopt v6, and we wanted to stay ahead of that curve. So that was, I think, the major sort of contributing factors in that. Yeah.
Thanks. Alec, can you tell us a little about what drove your decisions to adopt v6?
Customer feedback drives, better than 90% of our roadmap decisions at AWS. So ultimately, it was hearing those demands from customers, and those demands in turn were largely driven by, I think, the things that have been talked about here in terms of the obvious exhaustion of IPv4, leading to network providers and viewer network operators needing to do unnatural things like natting and natting within natting to keep the IPv4 network connected, which creates natural performance constraints. So we had customers saying they really wanted to be able to continue to connect directly to their customers and be able to grow that customer base without having to worry about those sorts of challenges.
So it's interesting. You hear a lot of people say, there's no demand for v6. So it's nice to hear an organization actually say we heard that from our customers. Zaid, in a platform like LinkedIn, did you also hear from customer feedback, or was this an internal driven decision?
No, it was an internal decision. Our customers are, our end users, our members are so massive, so much out there. But I think the way we look at it is we want to be able to keep up, right, with technologies. We want to also make sure that our members are having good experience. And so if we didn't take the leap on v6, then to like Alec's point earlier, right, you hear about natting over natting, and so we don't want, at the end of the day, we knew that would affect performance, and so we want to make sure that we have a v6 stack available that people can connect to. If they shouldn't have to come any other way.
Yeah, sure. Hector, go ahead.
I'll make a comment from the customer side. It's good to hear some companies that take a proactive approach, but from our perspective, it's been a very frustrating road in the past few years when we engage vendors in different solutions that we look at, and we get two different answers. One is that they don't even know what IPv6 is, or they don't have an interest because the customers are not pressuring them to implement it. And just recently, we evaluated a product that provided analytics, and again, we brought the equipment on campus. We tested it, and we knew offhand that it didn't support IPv6, and we wanted to work with the vendor. But the answer back was that there just wasn't enough demand for it. There wasn't enough customers asking for it, so they had no interest in implementing it at the time. So.
Can I just add one more thing? I actually just remembered your question earlier. So in terms of asks from customers, I did forget that we have a group that was selling to the U.S. government, and I think the U.S. government mandate was passed there. That wasn't like a major driver, but it was actually, to answer your question, if there was any kind of customer, that would be the closest. So just want to say that.
So one of the things for us almost 12 years ago is just V4 is just too small, right? It wasn't big enough for kind of the growth pattern. So for us, it was early realization that there wasn't enough room out there. And honestly, V6 is so much simpler, right? And these days, all the acrobatics you have to do with V4 is kind of gross, right? So every day that we go down this path, we find that there's more and more reasons, why V6 was and continues to be the right answer, right? Just the crazy gymnastics we have to do in some cases, or we've seen that had to be done in some cases. It's awful, right? So it really is.
So maybe let's move on to services. Start with Alec. What services today do you provide over V6?
So over V6 today, AWS provides support, dual stack support for VPC, EC2, ALB, and ELB, which are the application load balancer and elastic load balancer, as well as S3, Route 53, CloudFront, WAF, S3 transfer acceleration, Direct Connect, and IoT. And all of these give customers the ability to operate either in an IPv4 only mode or in a dual stack IPv4 and IPv6 mode.
Thanks. Zaid, same question. What services do you provide?
So for us, it's mobile and desktop, right? Is the way. So anything behind LinkedIn.com or what we call like sub-microsites around it are all V6. Anything coming to the front end of anything connected to LinkedIn.com is V6, and that's via mobile. So including the client on here, plus your desktop. That's pretty much all V6.
Thanks. Hector, also same question. What services are you providing over V6?
So as I mentioned, we're dual stack across the network. We support IPv6 on our wireless, so every wireless host that connects to our wireless will get both a V4 and a V6 address. Even on our VPN for remote access into the campus, we provide also a V6 address. We have worked with some departments on campus so that they can enable their websites for V6 accessibility. We have some wikis that are used by staff and students that are V6 enabled. And about 2 years ago, our main site supported V6, and due to some challenges that they had with a content manager solution and a load balancer, they had to disable support for IPv6. So we don't have IPv6 support with our main site anymore.
So beyond what we've talked about already, video and data. Voice is still something that is in the works for us, but it's less interesting to this crowd. Our public Wi-Fi, Xfinity Wi-Fi, is dual stack enabled. Our CDN, and basically everything that we need to fuel the business. Our own internal cloud, plus the work that we do with third parties. It's really mandatory for us. So anybody who wants to do business with us has to support V6.
Could you talk about some of the specific steps you took to deploy V6?
Any area in particular?
It's your choice.
So, I'll say, back in 2005, the first 3 years were pretty fruitless in the sense that we spent the better part of 3 to 4 years doing a lot of prep work, running the network, enabling V6, upgrading back office systems. That's probably the piece, Aaron, that took us the longest. This was back from 2005 to 2008. Frankly, going even further back, we actually had to create V6 for DOCSIS. It wasn't there in 2005. So we did that, and then worked with all the vendors to get everything tested, deployed, and ready. Everything, for people who understand how cable networks work, CMTSs all had to be developed, tested, hardened for V6. then along the way is really, I think there's one word that comes to mind, right? It's incrementalism, right? Even though the graphs are all very pretty and up and to the right, a very short period of time, there's a lot of engineering that went into making sure that we had an incremental approach to migrating things to V6. So for us, it was making sure that we developed the technology and the tools to really allow for that to happen. And that principle really, Aaron, applies to everything that we've done, whether it was a cable modem like in your house, or commercial DOCSIS service like in yours, or video, or what have you, right? Incrementalism was key.
Certainly. Alec, same question.
So I think John said it well, that taking incremental steps is important. Looking at it a layer deeper, from a technical perspective, we definitely started from the network layer and worked our way up. With AWS built as a variety of utility services on top of the network, we needed to obviously make sure the network was ready, because having the services go to IPv6 before our underlying network would do it, just logically wouldn't make sense there. So from there, once the network was ready, we then empowered all of our service teams and encouraged them to prioritize IPv6 on their roadmap based on what they were hearing from their customers, as well as the just overall plans that AWS had, and then that led to where we are today.
Thanks. Zaid or Hector, anything you want to add for particular deployment steps?
All I can say is, for us, like I said, we had to do an inventory of our network gear to see where we needed to either replace or upgrade. Looking at our addressing scheme, we started with one particular scheme, and the way we did it, we were so used to working with V4 and being conservative, etc., and we hadn't grasped, the immensity of the IPv6 space. And once we got used to that and learned that you don't have to be as conservative as you are on V4, we redesigned our addressing scheme so that it would be more flexible. In it, we were able to embed information that would help us in troubleshooting, like adding VLAN information or loopback information, things like that. And I guess what made it easy for us is the fact that because it's dual stack, it's almost like a seamless transition. So.
So for us, I'd sort of look at 2014 as sort of a pivot. Before that, we spent like 2 to 3 years making sure the infrastructure was ready, including the backbone and everything. We were already ready for like almost a year prior to sort of the app going to launch, but we were building new data centers. We were making sure that anything we did was V6 centric or dual stack everywhere. And then when we sort of got closer to 2014, in order to go to the developers and says, hey, we got to turn on V6, we wanted to be absolutely sure that we got our ducks in the row on the infrastructure side, which really helps sort of the case if you want to convince your product folks that, hey, you got to support V6. So that was where we spent sort of majority of the chunk. Like we have thousands of services sort of behind LinkedIn.com that would have to eventually understand how to talk to V6. So the thing that we did was, instead of going to make sure that all the backends could speak, we just focused on the front end. So one thing that we do is we have software load balancing on the edge, so we didn't have to deal with any vendors from a load balancing perspective. So we ended up putting the features that we wanted in the software. So we were able to say, hey, don't worry about all the backend. We'll just translate for you and then serve you V4 on the backend. So that way we could sort of terminate V6 from an end user perspective. I guess the two things I would sort of point out that were critical in our decision making was, one was, how do you store the V6 address, right? So prior to that was where a lot of the debate was, because before sort of looking at V6, people were storing in various databases and inside our data warehouse in text format, right? And in V6, because it can be stored in sort of multiple formats, multiple ways you can write it, you want querying becomes a little bit more complicated. So you really need to move to a binary form of storage of the V6 address space. So we had to sort of spend a bit of time figuring out how do we transition that without and supporting the old one while moving to the new one, and then eventually deprecating that. The other aspect was also to figure out, how do we handle abuse on the side and scraping and those kind of things. So we had to sort of like put a lot of effort in that area to make sure that when we launch that we have pure visibility into our end users, and also making sure that those security aspects are taken care of. So those were the sort of the big pivotal points.
Thanks for that. Obviously, with any kind of technology change you make in your organization, there's always going to be things to think about. Sometimes they're relatively simple, and sometimes they're fairly challenging obstacles. Perhaps you can share one or two obstacles that you've come across with deploying v6 and what you did to overcome those obstacles. And we'll start with Alec on this.
Sure. We actually had a couple of interesting ones that I think will provide good learnings for folks who are still moving down the deployment path. One was on the network layer itself, and this related to path MTU discovery, where we found that when we turned on v6, we found a variety of components both in our network as well as external to our network that weren't actually passing ICMP-v6 packet too big messages, and they weren't actually passing the IPv4 ones properly either. But because of the number of providers out on the internet that are still using 6 and 4 tunneling, you have a much higher likelihood of v6 traffic actually being subject to those sorts of path MTU discovery issues. So I think the one big takeaway we had there was to make sure that your entire network infrastructure and that you work with your providers to make sure that their network infrastructure is passing the path MTU discovery messages for both v4 and v6 just for good practice uninhibited, because that can cause all sorts of very hard to diagnose network problems in that layer. Higher up, we found these weren't issues that we ran into in terms of in production, but we found these problems in our analysis. Specifically, that when you're in a dual stack world, assumptions are different than in a single stack world. And if you're looking at how an application will use the IP address, sometimes you'll have what we refer to as customers doing serial connections to divergent endpoints. Right. So, for instance, you might have a customer who's trying to get some authenticated content, and they would go to a vending service and request basically a credential for that authenticated content. That credential oftentimes contains the source IP address of the requesting client as part of the authentication, so you can really constrain who can actually use that credential. In a single stack world, that assumption works out pretty well, because you can easily operate under the assumption that the first connection to the vending service will come from the same source IP address as the second connection to the actual content service. But that's not true in a dual stack world, right? Because your vending service could possibly, even if both your vending service and your content service are both dual stack, the notion of dual stack is that either if you reach either endpoint, either one's good. Right, so you might connect to the vending service over IPv6, and then you might connect to the content service over IPv4, or vice versa. So those are the kinds of things that you really need to pay attention to with your specific application and use of dual stack to make sure that you factor those sorts of things into account. Now, there are ways by both making the client and the client, the vending service, and the content service aware that they are operating in a dual stack world that you can address that challenge, but that requires work beyond simply making the application dual stack. So I think the biggest lesson there is dual stack is not just a drop-in for any and all applications. You need to look at your application and make sure you're not going to have that kind of assumption about the consistency of the network layer address across serial connections, because dual stack does break some of those assumptions.
Yep, certainly seen that before, even like auto-reloading pages where authentication has happened and we've bound to an IP address and it flips and all of a sudden you're logged out. Yeah, very common to see. Yeah. John, you want to share some of your obstacles and how you overcame them?
There's so many. Yeah, not enough time. See, guys, let's keep talking till Wednesday. I think the one that I'm sitting here pondering as I'm listening to Alec, lately there's been like a resurgence of CPE problems, right? Things like you'd buy from a retail perspective, like you go out to Best Buy or whatever, buy some gear, and at one point it did v6, and now for some reason it doesn't. And I called this one out in particular because it's like whack-a-mole, right? You don't know when it's going to pop up, but it pops up at the worst possible time, and then you got to figure out like how to chase it down and get it fixed. So it's one of the things that I yeah, and this is pretty recent even. Even you and I have exchanged some emails about this. There's some other things that we're seeing, even past few, couple of months. It's one of those things where it'd be super if we had all the people who introduced these CPE devices into the kind of the retail ecosystem did so in a more responsible manner, right? We find them, we find them, and then we fix them. But unfortunately, one of the cornerstones for our V6 rollout was, the commitment that we made is, it wouldn't be impactful to the customer, right? So what ends up happening is in some cases, our customers notice, right? Very small, but it's something that I personally take very seriously, right? So.
Zaid, do you want to share any obstacles and how you overcame them?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think ones I could. So Path MTUT was definitely one. Early on, we discovered that, and we had to put fixes around that. That was kind of an easy one, but we had to discover that along the way because we were doing canary tests and we were seeing things up front and people putting Twitter messages, hey, I see V6 on LinkedIn and here's some problems. So that was interesting. But we had a sort of a very small rollout at that time. As we started to get closer to the rollout, I would say that sort of, I've talked a little bit about sort of the storing of IPv6 addresses, so I won't go into that. But the other one was just sort of understanding the impact it would have on the customer, right? So forefront, one of the big things we did was like making sure that we are able to measure V6 performance, and that was one of our sort of gating factors. We had to, before we rolled out, we had to make sure we measured it. So we deployed RAM measurements to make sure. And in that process, I think we found our CDN providers just weren't deployed V6 as wide as we would have liked them to. So taking those measurements and sharing that data sort of really helped our CDN providers get to the level of deployment that we were actually comfortable with for rollout, and that's what we used to sort of drive the CDN providers to sort of get that. That was sort of one of our bigger obstacles, and then once that sort of happened, then we were able to sort of pick a date and do the launch and all those things. So that's where I would say there was bigger obstacles, yeah.
Thanks. Hector, anything you want to share?
Yeah, like John was saying, yeah, there's many challenges with IPv6 in the beginning, through the course, and in the future. Early on at our university, we have a mechanism to allow hosts on the network. We require MAC address registration, and when we started implementing V6, because of this registration relies on both IPv4 and DNS, we quickly realized that if we implemented V6, we were going to automatically provide network access to our hosts, even if they were not registered. So the workaround for that was to only provide a V4 DNS so that we could still continue to control their access, and our DNS server would provide both the A and Quad A records. That was a workaround. We don't have the best security for network access at the university, but what we're looking into the future is to implement .1x. And with that came more challenges. We just acquired a new Rios solution. And even when you do all your homework, you come to run into these surprises. We found with our Rios solution that we're not capturing the V6 address in the accounting records. So again, we just didn't do our homework right, and we found this issue, and we're working with our vendor to try to resolve that. And it's just a bunch of weird things that you run into in our border router. When we were implementing it or upgrading it a couple of years ago, we couldn't implement an ACL to control SNMP access, and the workaround for that was to create an ACL for V4 and V6 with the same name and apply it. So it's just a lot of weird stuff like that. So.
Hey, Aaron, just one kind of clarifying comment. I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer, right? Talking about so many. I think just a piece of context for everybody who's listening. This is like a 12-year project, right? And I say that like tongue in cheek. So we've seen a lot of things early on that I know a lot of people in this room will never see, right? So when we talk about like a host of issues that we've seen, we've seen them and conquered them and put them away, and they don't generally don't come back. So I didn't want people to take away like hey, there's so many problems. And I don't want to be the guy that I don't want to be the guy that somebody here says, oh, I'm not going to turn on V6 because that guy from Comcast said so, right?
We certainly appreciate the early adoption and working with vendors to take on some of those bugs first. I'm sure everybody can appreciate that. So maybe let's look at this from a different perspective and talk about investment. All of these organizations are different sizes and different flavors. For those people who haven't implemented V6 yet, what kind of departments or staff would you recommend people get involved in the investment for deploying V6 for them and maybe for your organization, just when you think about this process? I mean, obviously, you're talking about a 12-year process. That seems like a big investment. Maybe we'll start with you and we'll move down the line.
We were pretty fortunate, honestly. Some of the key leaders for us early on had made the decision. We didn't really, I think the biggest thing that kind of kept us honest was making sure that we didn't, we assumed that we were operating on a $0 budget, right? And I was telling somebody earlier, can't remember who it was now, but basically that's still pretty much the case, right? We don't, we didn't really. There's only one system in particular that we had to actually have a dedicated budget for. It was our provisioning system. We had to accelerate and upgrade there. Otherwise, everything else we basically rode in the coattails of other things that happened in the network. So. And I don't claim that my scenario is kind of, it's probably the exception to the rule, right? I think people that the list of people to engage is everybody from anybody who cares about the customer experience to people who care about how are we going to get V4 addresses if we're going to want to continue to grow, right? They have financial implications, they have planning implications. I mean, you can even talk to people from mergers and acquisitions and say, hey. We want to go and buy companies. Okay, so how's that going to work, right? So I mean, for us, it started with people on the infrastructure network side, right, and it really fanned out from there. And I think most product people don't care about V4, right? They just they want it to work. So it's really a mix of people that you got to talk to. And like I said, fortunately for us, we had some leadership that had great vision.
So Hector, being from a university, I imagine your experience is quite different. Maybe you can share who you got involved in your V6 deployment.
Yeah, so I guess the vision started with us because we had the understanding of the technology and the impact. And the challenge was to be able to translate that into something that the university understood and was able to support. And it's, again, continues to be a challenge. So I think the key for us, we just have a new chief technology officer. Our previous CIO, chief technology officer, I mean, there were too many things on their plate. And, when you bring something like IPv6, I have to assume that it's not a big priority. So I think getting the buy-in from your CIO for a university is huge, so that he can be the person that translate the importance of V6. The university moved away from an old mainframe system into a new ERP solution that's hosted in the cloud, and unfortunately doesn't support IPv6. So I don't have any power over those decisions. And when you bring up something like that to people that don't understand it, they'll push it to the side. So even with things like that, it's really difficult to get across the idea of how important IPv6 is. So, but again, from the networking standpoint, I mean, because we understand again the impact and the technology, I think it's incumbent upon us to do our best to try to gain support from as many people as possible. Again, started from your CIO and as many other people as you can.
That's actually something I've heard quite a bit in deployments, is that This technology, unlike most, requires upward management and education in other departments that's different than a lot of typical technology changes. Zaid, I know LinkedIn has treats their customer experience as absolutely critical. Can you talk about who you had to get involved in LinkedIn?
Yeah, so our experience is a little different. We don't generally have to get much of a buy-in from management. I mean, my org is responsible for making sure infrastructure is up and can serve. So it's very easy for me to go and say, hey, we need V6, right? And we need to go do that. However, I do still need to work with, my peers on various product groups to make sure that that they would support turning it up when, at sort of a timely pace. So I would say that sort of a bulk of that went to sort of trying to convince other folks that, hey, this is a priority this year as opposed to last year, and sort of dealing with that because we're it's always competing with various features and all those things. So what I ended up doing was finding a few champions, one or two, one in very, very particular, who saw the value and says, hey, I'm going to go champion on talking to thousands of developers and giving an influence. So I found a partner on that side who really was like hey, we got to do this now, and went and talked to various project managers, product managers across the board to make sure. But even sort of prior to that, I think I just gave one presentation to sort of exec staff at LinkedIn and said, here's why I got it. And everyone just nodded their head, and then I had to go figure out how to make it happen. So and again, coming back to sort of my advice would be just finding the champion, right, that will help you to get the message across and to get it into the timelines that you want. That's sort of where I think that we got focused on.
Maybe we can convince ARIN's staff to design some V6 pom-poms for the champions. Alec, how about you?
Yeah, I think Zaid really hit the nail on the head there. The key here is to find the people who are responsible for prioritizing roadmaps and convince them, get them to believe that they need to prioritize it. And that's going to be different for every organization, right? If you're a network provider, it's going to be different from if you're you're a computing infrastructure provider versus if you're a consumer-facing entity. But all of those stakeholders are going to be either directly or indirectly affected. And the one thing they need to realize is that they may not be hearing the feedback from customers now, and that's dangerous, because the further away their customers get from the nitty-gritty of the network details, the less likely they are to have the foresight to realize they need V6. And what's going to happen is those customers will only be complaining by the time it's too late and there's already customer impacting deterioration in performance and customer experience. And by the time that happens, it's going to be a lot of time between that and when you can actually get V6 deployed, because it is a project and it touches everything. Things like anti-abuse systems, right? You have anti-abuse systems that are built on the notion of unique IPv4 addresses. All of those assumptions change. So if you have anti-abuse technology involved there, they need to get involved. Metering systems, accounting systems, all of those sorts of systems that process log data all need to be changed. So getting those stakeholders involved early and often, and having them realize that by the time it gets to the point that enough customers are complaining and your senior leadership team or your CEO is complaining, you're not going to have a good answer. You do not want to be that guy in that position or that woman in that position.
Thanks, Alex. So let's swing the pendulum and leave the challenges for a moment and go to benefits. Thinking about your organization, either from an internal perspective or your customer's perspective, have you seen any great benefits to enabling V6 in your infrastructure? Maybe we'll start with you, John.
So I have several different customers, right? So I have customers, on the broadband network, video, what have you. The simplicity has made V6 is so much more simple, right? And the customers are really the beneficiary of that. And the opportunity is on us to basically leverage V6 to be able to do that, right? Things like being able to manage how we provision and deliver the actual services using V6 compared to V4, omitting all of the acrobatics that come alongside with V4. Even performance benefits, ARIN. We've seen opportunities there for performance benefits that ultimately are going to fuel a better customer experience. And then internally on the flip side, my coworkers are my customers, right? So one of the things I kind of often say is if we would have launched V6 and I didn't put the tools into my coworkers' hands, I had two choices. Either be the most hated employee in the company or do all their jobs for them. Neither was an option, right? It just can't be done, right? Either one, right? So we have lots of people who work at Comcast, and not putting the tools in their hands it's just not fair, right? It wasn't couldn't run a business that way. And again, while trying to improve the customer experience, right? So I've got customers on both fronts, and I again I take that very seriously to the extent where I want to make sure that everybody has a solid great running network to do the things they need to go ahead and do. For us, I've seen some pretty gross things from a V4 point of view that I sat there and I scratched my head and I said, I can't believe that actually works. And V6 was just a great opportunity to simplify it. So, and those were all internal systems that most regular customers would never see.
Hector, how about you? From a university perspective, any great benefits for enabling V6?
I think one of the main benefits is the awareness that we have been able to raise just because of us supporting IPv6. From my team's perspective, I mean, we do have a lot of experience, so we know how to deal with issues. But the rest of the community, for those, they all get exposed to IPv6 all the time. So if for those that don't know, it raises their curiosity, and we're available to provide guidance. We have documentation, again, for people to know. And so the hope is that by having it in place, when there are conversations about anything, V6 is not something that's forgotten. At the same time, we've had few instances, where because we're dual stack, I can remember one instance where our provider experienced an issue on the network, and the issue had been specifically on their V4 part of the network, and V6 was working. So it was nice to see that at least we had some redundancy built in because of IPv6. I mean, only the resources that were reachable via V6 were available, but again, there was some benefit that we hadn't thought of. So.
Yep, totally seen that. Seen lockout from V4 and been able to get in for V6 and help resolve a problem. Absolutely awesome. Zaid, how about you? Benefits from enabling V6?
Sure. So I think earlier I mentioned about measurements, right? I talked about RUM and how we deployed that. So when we launched, we just wanted, to make sure that V6 was performing, as good as V4, right? That was sort of the notion we went with back in 2014, and then having those measurements in place, we've been checking and making sure that our folks that are monitoring the site are started to sort of give us some data, and we started to see that in pockets we saw V6 was performing better than V4, and I guess one of the unique things is that on our mobile app, because we control both ends, we're able to actually see more than most desktop applications, right? So we're able to then, get direct messages from our client through our mobile providers, and we're able to see, in some pockets like 3 to 5 to even up to like 10% or even 15% in some cases, depending on which mobile provider it was. And that was like a sort of a pleasant surprise. Like we didn't expect that, but we actually saw that certain mobile carriers, like we actually saw performance improvements on V6.
All right. Performance, education, simplification. Alec.
As an infrastructure provider, we've definitely heard from our customers that by having them be able to now deploy v6 is certainly letting them remove that from their checklist of things they don't have to worry about. But a lot of our customers still have to operate and do a lot of the gymnastics that John mentioned in terms of supporting IPv4. So from that administrative overhead standpoint, it hasn't provided the ultimate benefit of being able to do everything over v6, which is certainly what we're shooting for. But being able to now have a clear path towards when we finally get to the point where v4 is just not tenable is definitely provided a huge benefit to our customers.
Add something?
Yeah, one more, Aaron. So innovation, right? So one of the things that we've also been able to really realize from our point of view is if you can break out of the mindset that v6 is absolutely not v4, the opportunity for innovation is extraordinary, especially in this time for like IoT. I almost feel like I need to go to confession for even saying IoT. Catholics in the room, you know what I'm talking about. But IoT, the opportunity for innovation in the home in particular, right? It's with v6, we just have that much more room to innovate. It's and as long as you don't get stuck in the mindset of trying to treat v6 like v4, there's enormous opportunities out there. Everything from how do you advance the state of the art in the home to things like v6 segment routing and everything in between.
Waiting for Kathy to jump up and scream HomeNet and babble. All right. So there are a lot of people in the industry here that are looking at you as leaders and experts. If you could give any one piece of advice to the listeners out there about v6 adoption, what would it be? And maybe we'll start with you, Zaid.
So I would say put measurements in place, like start measurements early. You can't, if you want to fix something, you need to make sure you measure it first, right? So you won't be able to see the problems, you won't be able to address them. I would say that would be my one advice, right? And from an external perspective, like if you're a content provider, the other little advice I would just give some experience we've had recently was that we are turning up a lot of v6 only or even dual stack inside our data centers. We're actually finding that we have to think v6 from day one, right? Have to start thinking that how to deploy zero-touch provisioning, those kind of things. So that when you start sort of thinking in that area, at some point you probably just ask yourself, like, why am I supporting dual stack, right? It becomes a overhead. Operational people say, I don't want to serve dual stack. I just want one stack, right? So then it starts to sort of get your mind and your thinking to that direction, right? And I think at that point you realize that you will only start to think v6 only. So I'm just gonna give two different perspectives, right, of where you could actually get a lot of benefit out of.
Thanks, Zaid. Hector, how about you? Any advice you want to share with the industry?
Yeah, I guess the only comment that I can make is it's not as hard as people think, and especially, I think we alluded to the fact that we've been the ones that have been the beta testers in a way. We work with the vendors trying to solve the issues, but now if we were to implement it now, I know that it would be a lot easier than it was when we started. A lot of for us, networking products out there already come with built-in IPv6 support. So it's not even a question now of where are we making an additional expense, things like that. It's already enabled. So again, just getting your hands dirty and knowing the fact that, again, it's not as hard as you think. I would say, for universities or anybody that has large wireless networks, you do need to do your homework, because v6 presents some unique challenges because of it's a little different than v4, and because you support it in a dual stack environment. To your point, at some point, yeah, we would love to make the transition to v6 only, but we're not there yet. So we have to make sure that the gear that we're buying is going to be able to support both protocols. So that's it.
Thanks, Hector. Alec, advice to the industry?
I'd say follow the Henry Ford principle. There are no big problems. There are just collections of small problems. So don't look at v6 as, oh my God, I have to convert my entire network and application stack, because you'll look at it and you'll just say, well, I can never get that prioritized. find a piece of it, find a meaningful piece, see if you can get a piece of your network going, and just make incremental progress. To the comments that have been made earlier about that incremental progress, that's an essential attitude, because if you just start making progress, then your peers at your organization will start to see that progress being made and really see V6 as the way forward. So start early and start small.
I think you have to be the ball, right? And what I mean by that is, at work I'd say be the packet, but you guys don't work enough with me to know the hell I'm talking about if I say that. So I say be the ball, and what I mean by that is you have to know what you're working with, right? You have to know what about V6 matters to you to solve real problems, right? If you don't do your homework and if you don't understand how it works, and it's really not that hard as Hector said. I mean, at least it's a lot less hard today than it was 10 years ago. If you don't know what ingredients you have to work with, you don't know how great of a dinner you could possibly make, right? So that's really the analogy I leave you with. It's like you have to know what it is that you're working with so that you can solve real problems. If you're just making stuff up, your odds of success are pretty low, right? But if you understand what exactly it is that you're working with and how to solve real problems, you'll be very successful with it.
So, somewhat similar question, but we're wrapping it up. So, when you think about this whole process, what is your key takeaway? And we'll start with you, Alec.
See, I would say my key takeaway from this whole process is that it's great to be done and be in a position of having it there, and I think just reinforcing the fact that get started now. I think that, and so it was, as with any big project, you kind of look back on it and you say, wow, it was a lot of work, but it would have been great to be done sooner. So the best way to be done sooner is to start sooner. So start now, and that would kind of be my biggest takeaway.
I think my key takeaway would be sort of in lines of it is simple. It is not as hard, right? And I think the other thing is that as you get more into it, as you start to measure things, and if you start to sort of look at sort of technologies that are inside your network, innovation becomes a lot more simple, right? Like everything is simpler in terms of V6, right? So once you start to have that kind of mindset, like, it becomes really exciting, and the windows of opportunity, like John was saying, like sometimes you wonder like how you did that in V4, right? Same kind of thinking. So I think that to me is sort of like that's what excites my team and my engineers, right? They get really excited on V6 projects because then they have all these new things that they can do and new ways of looking at things.
Thanks, Zaid. Hector?
I would say that it would be great to say that we're glad to be done, but we're not done. It's again a work in progress. The key takeaway, though, is the fact that we've been doing it for so long that any new challenge that is presented to us, we can tackle it. Again, today we provide IPv6 addresses via Slack. We have a new DHCP solution in place. DHCP v6 is the next thing for us, and after that is gonna come, getting rid of v4 and go v6 all the way. So yeah, we're not done. There's a lot more work to do, but again, we're doing it as we go, and learning a lot.
Sounds like back to incremental. John, key takeaway.
Have an open mind. V6 is not V4. Don't bring any of the baggage forward. Be creative.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for their time and support and being industry experts, sharing this information with you and everybody that's listening. Really appreciate it. Also, a thanks to Jennifer Bly for helping with putting this panel together. Cheers.
Thank you, ARIN, for your able moderation. We're now going to have our lunch, and then we'll come back and do some policy sessions. So a couple of things. There's lunch table topics. When you go out to lunch, you'll see a few of the tables in the lunchroom have topics on them. And if you want to talk about that topic, it's easy to do if you sit at the table where other people are talking about that topic. Not that you can't sit at a different table and yell back and forth, but it's easier if you try to get to one table. So joining the AC is one of the topics. Increasing participation in ARIN is one of the topics. And who uses Whois and RDAP is one of the topics. So we try to have topics at the lunch tables to help people have topics of conversation. Gather at one of those tables if you're interested. Let's see. We have a special lunch.
Hey, John.
Someone has the clicker.
John, no V6 table, man?
Oh, you can create a V6. Find John if you want a V6 discussion. Okay?
I'll be at the bar.
Okay. No, that's for the people who haven't gotten it done yet. Next slide. Someone has my clicker. Thank you. Yes, Women's Networking Lunch. There's a Women's Networking Lunch in the Royal Salon. If you want to go talk about that, that's back where we had Sunday's programs. You run down there. And security. This room is open. Take your valuables with you because it's not locked. So we want to make sure that the people who go with your valuables are you. Come back at 1:30 and we'll start. We have excellent presentations, policy experience report, and a couple of new policies to take up. Thank you.